It's the world's greatest library and a junkyard of gibberish. It's where every musician is a star, where anyone can be an artist, and the definition of music and art is up for grabs. It's Big Brother's worst nightmare, a place of unlimited freedom. It's also the playground of cyberpunks and cybersex. It's the wide-open, freewheeling, messy world of cyberspace. What you're watching is Electroculture, art with an edge. It's art about life in the future, using images that are unfamiliar and often confusing, but abounds with technology.
There are a lot of analogies that the people are using about the future, and of course the superhighway is perhaps the most common analogy. And I've heard it said that on the road to the future there's perhaps three kinds of people. There are those that are driving, there are those that are passengers, and there are those that are roadkill. And it reminds me an awful lot of Richard Adams' book, Watership Down. And you'll remember in there he describes how small animals, rabbits in this case, get caught in the headlights of automobiles and they freeze. And he uses the term tharn to describe this process. And he suggests that quite often the animals die without ever being hit. They simply die from fear, from anticipation of what might happen to them by the lights and the confusion. And I do worry that so many people are caught in the lights of the future.
People still don't realize that technology is a two-way street, that every wire coming into their homes is not just a way for some big brother to monitor them or their buying habits or behaviors, but it's a way for them to monitor everything else that's going on in the world. And as soon as people start to see technology as an extension of who they are, rather than just an extension of who them is, you know, they'll have a very different feeling toward it.
Most writers can't imagine how they'd work without a computer, but early on, some couldn't imagine how they'd work with one. Writers like Douglas Adams.
The reason I couldn't see any way that a computer could possibly be of use to a writer is that I misunderstood what a computer was. But luckily, I mean, I wasn't alone. I mean, the whole of the rest of the world misunderstood what a computer was, in that we all thought it was an adding machine. And after a while, because we're able to manipulate these numbers with increasing speed and sophistication, we think, well, what else can these numbers stand for? Maybe they can stand for the letters of the alphabet. And so we suddenly think, oh God, how stupid we were, how lacking in imagination we were to think that this is just an adding machine. What it is, it's a typewriter. So we develop it for a while as a typewriter, and then we think, well, hang on, whilst we're at it, you know, what else can we make these numbers for? Like the, you know, the elements of a graphic display, the pixels. And so we think, good heavens, you know, we shouldn't be restricted in thinking of it as a typewriter. It's a television with a typewriter stuck in front of it. Now, of course, with the World Wide Web, we've got a whole new paradigm, which is think of it, it's a brochure. It's a brochure.
Or think of it as the world's most magical doorway.
For people who are not familiar with what the World Wide Web is, imagine this science fiction device. So in the middle of a landscape, you've got a door standing there. You can walk up to that door, and as you walk through it, you're suddenly in a different place. And the new place you walk into, there are lots of other doors. And you can walk through any of those doors, and you get to another place in the world. Now imagine also that on each of these doors, are pinned pictures, notices, tape cassettes, and anything you want can be sort of pinned to that door. And those doors sort of connect, as it were, through hyperspace to anywhere else in the world. So you walk through one door and you emerge out of another door, which is 5,000 miles away.
So the computer is like the key to the door. Plug it into a phone line, and you're all set to surf the net. The Internet was conceived as a military network by the Pentagon in the 1960s to keep information out of the hands of the enemy in case of a nuclear war. Now there are about 100,000 websites on the Internet, each with its own unique address that links into anything and everything. Early on, the Internet was used by a handful of researchers, but as more and more people bought personal computers in the late 80s, this web of information became available to the masses. Now 40 million people use the Internet in 150 countries. By the year 2000, over 200 million users will be wired up. Internet users represent a lucrative market, and advertisers are rushing to create websites targeted right at them. This is the design office of Organic Online in California. It helped create a website for Levi Strauss & Company, which offers a wealth of information about youth culture to hook young internet surfers.
I think that the most exciting part of the Levi site is how it dealt with content. Rather than it just being a corporate brochure on the web, they really tried to target market the individuals that would be buying the products. So there's a lot of content about DJs, there's content about people, young people in the scene, the underground fashion, that kind of thing. So I think it makes it more exciting for someone to want to come in here rather than just have, you know, the jeans, here's the jeans, and that's it. We're looking at information in a totally different way now. Information on demand is a pretty serious tool. And I think that people are going to be better for it. If people are interested in educating themselves, this is the way to do it. Go out and find the information that you're looking for.
Location is no longer, physical location, is no longer any inhibition to the gathering of knowledge. You can sit in the Western Isles in a public library and quite theoretically, and not just theoretically, absolutely practically, go into the Smithsonian and borrow a file in Washington, or check with the museum in Calcutta as on the origins of the Bengali language. There is no natural or physical limit to the information gathering process on either the most simple level or the most complex and detailed level, and that has to be a phenomenal asset.
So it's a mammoth, global 24-hour library of information, but it differs from a library in one big way. You don't just browse for facts. Everyone on the net can browse with everyone else. The Internet can also feed you information the way television and newspapers can, with another big twist. Instead of taking what one channel or one newspaper gives you, you can see what thousands of people around the world on the net have to say.
The mainstream media, probably even the very channel we're being broadcast on now, is the enemy of the Internet. It's the enemy of cyberspace. It's the enemy of do-it-yourself home media. Because the way, especially television newsmakers, you know, be they the old William Randolph Hearsts or today's Rupert Murdochs, you know, the way they traditionally have maintained their empires is by maintaining control over the content of media.
You're going to see the breakdown of centralized control of publishing, of broadcasting. The balance of power goes to the creative individual, who now doesn't have to go through some centralized process that decides about the value of their work. The marketplace will decide about the value of your work.
Well, if you take musicians as an example, you know, one of the problems that young musicians have always had is communicating their wares, and if they don't get you know, Radio 1 or Virgin Radio or the other radio stations to play their product, they don't get heard and nobody knows about them. So having another outlet like the Internet, where they can you know, get their message across to millions of people, and gives them a chance to bypass the sort of conventional way of getting known.
One group of musicians taking advantage of the new technology is the Future Sound of London. From their studio, they transmit music and images down high-speed ISDN lines. The band has groupies around the world on the internet. They're a band, pirate radio station, and TV channel rolled into one. Their music doesn't fit neatly into a mainstream category, nor does their video. It's a heady mix of graphics, film, and computer images edited into a psychedelic collage.
I view the art that we make as being an awkward shape, and I actually like that fact. It's awkward because it is not readily consumable by medias which I think have become increasingly lazy. Radio, in the way that it programs music, has become very lazy. Television's become lazy in the way it uses music, and so has the music industry. So basically, I have to become very creative about the ways that I want to spread it to people. And this is where our philosophy has come from. It is completely me being forced to. If I could just be lazy and just do something and everybody loved it, believe you me, I would. The fact of the matter is, I do things and radio says to me, well, I can't use them because your music won't work on my radio station. So therefore, what we do is we create our own radio shows. And then from that, we began to actually broadcast the radio shows from this studio in Dollis Hill. And from that, the whole philosophy came together that we can be this little self-contained unit which is beaming out to millions of people across the world. The first creative landmark for me really was coming across samplers. Having done conventional music for years, to come across such a radically different way of putting music together was obviously something I jumped immediately into with relish. And that consequently affected the whole music industry across the world, to the point where people, for the first time I think, could make music without people saying yes or no. And that was very important, because the yes or no men had become very important in terms of running the big studios, etc., etc.
Just as cyberspace connects musicians with their fans, it links writers with their readers. Douglas Rushkoff is a heavy user of email, electronic mail.
Having email is a great thing, because people who read my books email me. I get 50 or 100 emails a day from people who've read something or seen something like this show on TV, and they go, oh, what were you saying? And they can talk back to me. And while that's great for them, to be able to talk to me directly and have me answer them or try to defend myself against their usually very correct arguments, it's great for me, because I have the benefit now of, thousands of other minds who are commenting on my stuff rather than just 20 reviewers at the top papers who I'm supposed to respect. I can talk to real people and see how the things I say or do are hitting them, find out where I'm wrong, and correct myself for next time. So that's great. And online conversations, these conferences and bulletin boards are all very exciting in that I can find out about stuff I don't know. If I have a question, if I'm writing, rather than going to the library and trying to find what's already been said, I can go out and find what are people thinking right now about this. And that's fascinating.
The web also lets experts dabble in fields where they'd otherwise be considered amateurs. Next stop, Dr. Fiorella Terenzi, astrophysicist, performer, and publisher.
The World Wide Web is an extremely important medium, because finally I can give you an idea how does it look the universe outside, but how does it look the universe made by The language is able to take radio waves from celestial object and transforming the radio waves into sound, like an acoustic signature of celestial object. The sound is then saved on different medium, like, a DAT or a CD or like floppy. And with the floppy, I usually take my sound in my sampler, load my floppy in order to be able to play with my radio astronomical data directly from my keyboard. And at this point, finally, you can listen. How does it sound, these radio waves from 180 million light years away? It's very simple. You have the galaxy on a different key, and this is an example. With my music background, I was captured by the tonality and the microtonality of this galactic sound. I think it's very important to popularize science, have fun with it, dance with it. The way I do it, comes down to the big possibility we have to reinvent also our way to approach life. And I think, technology in the web, CD-ROM, interactivity give us a new way to explore what does it mean to be a human being.
The 1980s brought a personal computer to every desk. The 1990s connected these computers to the global internet. So who knows, in the next decade, everyone may be talking to everybody else, or instead we may be living in an electronic Tower of Babel. You're watching Cyberspace on TLC. What unifies a world of 6 billion people? Writer Douglas Rushkoff believes it could be the internet.
The internet and interactive media is really remedial help for a culture that's lost the ability to communicate with itself, to love itself, to touch itself. And it looks kind of funny now, and it's probably just an intermediate stage. It might be like braces on the teeth, that it's something we do to convince ourselves that we're one civilization, that we're one organism, and that once we realize, oh, we're one thing, we can just shed that off and be that way.
Perhaps the only time the entire population of the planet felt as one was when astronauts first photographed Earth from space. Now we see the world as a network of information, a bundle of ever-changing messages. In Berlin, software designers and artists have designed a system called TerraVision to make plugging into that network even easier. The idea behind TerraVision is to show all kinds of information based on highly detailed satellite pictures of cities, people, the weather. Then you can use this globe to find your way around, like linking an encyclopedia to an atlas. The designers at TerraVision are putting it into art galleries, libraries, and museums around the world. Shift the globe to one spot on the planet, zoom in on the city, then enlarge the image to a single street. You can even fly in through the window of an office in that street and take a look around. Right now it's just a prototype, but the more information and pictures are gathered about the world, the more comprehensive it'll be. The amount of data you can put into the system is limitless. So far, the designers have produced this 3D model of Berlin. It also doubles as a time machine, letting you see what a given area used to look like.
The idea was to make a virtual model of our world, a virtual planet. But the important thing wasn't this image as such. We really wanted to develop this virtual Earth as an interface, a sort of backdrop to display local information for each area. This information would include, for example, the weather, ecological data, sociological data, political data, and so on. We wanted to create a sort of virtual world on which the information could be powerfully visualized.
At TerraVision, the idea is to get local people everywhere to think globally, to encourage everyone to learn about people in other cultures and to start talking to them. For them, knowledge makes the world go round. But who's going to tap into this knowledge? And what if they do? Will information on demand make us understand the world any better?
I'm skeptical, to say the least. First of all, cyberspace is an issue for a tiny minority. The average person really using the technologies is probably a white male like myself, sitting on a plane somewhere tapping on a laptop. In fact, there's an entire universe of issues outside this little tiny elite community, which are completely untouched. These are the things that the techno-evangelists seem strikingly uninterested in. They're saving us in some way, but they haven't quite explained to us how, unless they really believe that we're going to somehow, ascend in some Star Trek-y way, into the vapor. And they have made that argument. Until that happens, we're stuck with the physical world.
For India, the physical world means hot and dusty highways choked with traffic. But for their techno-visionaries, the solution lies in an information superhighway of fiber optics and wireless technology. Their first challenge is creating a simple telephone network for an exploding economy, to make the link from the world of the information haves to that of the information have-nots. Sam Petroda, an advisor on technology to India's Prime Minister, knows cyberspace may swamp Indian computers with Western culture, but he also knows India has to get wired up and join the global electronic village.
I think India can only progress after you wire it up properly. Otherwise, the pace of growth is not going to be acceptable. Today, in this world, for 5.6 billion people, we have 600 million telephones. 85% of these telephones are in advanced countries of the world. 4 billion people have no access to telephones at all. So a whole lot of cultural things change as you begin to bring in this modern technology. Some changes are visible, other changes are not very visible, but they're very subtle and very fundamental. See, over a period of time, I believe globalization of telecom is going to bring about some amount of global culture. There is nothing wrong in having some sort of cross-cultural breeding. Americans will learn a little bit about India and practice some Indian, culture, and Indians will practice some Western culture. So you will see a sort of global culture evolve, but in the process you have to make sure that your culture don't get hijacked.
These villagers near Delhi are welcoming a holy man who's about to read from ancient Sanskrit manuscripts, part of the day-to-day religious life of India. Meanwhile, a debate rages in the country about whether Western films, satellite TV, and now the internet are threatening their culture, and whether traditions like this are on their way out.
See, what's happening today vis-a-vis cultural impact is that on one hand we are globalizing all the cultures, on the other hand we are taking one specific culture and taking it to global parts. You have all of a sudden Indian television programs broadcasted in Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, London, Paris. Couldn't happen earlier. So you have this whole, on one hand, trying to be part of a global community, on the other hand, trying to preserve and enhance your own cultural identity. These processes are going on simultaneously.
At the nearby Jiva Institute, the internet is being used to preserve tradition. The institute houses 2,000 manuscripts written on tree bark, hundreds of years old and too fragile to be handled. So the institute is using a computer to scan and store the writing. In their new digital form, the manuscripts are put on the institute's website on the internet, translated into English, and available to anyone who wants to read them. JivaNet is just one of the thousands of special interest websites. There are web pages for almost any subject you can think of, from academic ones like this one, to sites for fans of TV shows and rock stars. All the people interested in that subject will probably never meet, but they do form a virtual community, a community spread around the globe, and only as real as the link between their computers. This school is part of the Jiva Institute. It has all the trappings of cyberspace. Computers and the internet are part of the kids' education, and they seem completely at home here. They can even call up their own cyber pen pals at a school in Japan, nearly 4,000 miles away. Every day they log onto the net and exchange email. It's cyberspace in action on a global scale. Meanwhile, in the Shino Junior High School in Tokyo, students are learning about their hotline to the Jiva Institute in India. In this high-tech classroom, computers are as basic as pencils. These children actually have 2 computers each, one for school, one for home. Japan's prosperity depends on how they take to this technology. Ironically, for a country that pioneers the hardware, Japan has one of the lowest rates of computer use anywhere in the developed world. Business in many Japanese offices is still mostly done on telephones and typewriters. This major industrial power runs the risk of being left behind in the information age. Japan has reason to hesitate about going online. Surfing the internet is a loner's sport. You can spend hours doing it, and there's no telling where it'll take you. In a culture famous for its conformity, where everyone does everything together, cyberspace is alien country, and many Japanese hesitate to explore it. One fear about the internet in non-English speaking countries is that English will become the global language. Why? Because most of the information on the net is in English. But as demand for the internet grows in these countries, this trend will likely change. What's happening in these schools in India or in Japan is a sign of how this new means of communication is spreading.
The internet is a form of cultural intimacy. People are speaking to each other in ways they hadn't spoken to people before. They're sharing their opinions. It's very much like when you get in the United States, you get to junior high school, and you finally can talk to other kids about what's going on, and you talk in the locker room about certain things and in the bathroom about certain things. It's new intimacy, new conversation, and it feels almost a little naughty. And once you feel that you've been led to your own devices, you immediately think of sex and drugs and rock and roll and making weapons and all those naughty things.
Sex in cyberspace is a hot issue. People debate not only whether to ban it from the net, but whether to even try. Overshadowing this touchy issue is the huge commercial value of an uncensored internet. Governments may search for clever ways to ban pornography, but none may ever be foolproof. In cyberspace, sex sells.
A great deal of this is really about money. It's not necessarily about community. It's not about the imagination. It's not about empowerment. It's not about democracy. It's not necessarily about any of these things. What it definitely is about is a potential $3.5 trillion payday. When you have that much money on the line, it creates a kind of a vacuum, and people are going to be drawn into it, and you're going to find yourself buying into stuff that you either don't need or don't require, or that in some cases may be downright dangerous and detrimental. That's the real issue here. There are positive aspects to it, but you can never entirely separate them off from the digital hype.
Coming up, cyberspace is home to another kind of subversiveness, one that makes everybody with a PC an artist. For most of us, art is something that hangs on a wall in a living room or a gallery. The new Electroculture is rewriting that definition.
The work that I produce is loosely called organic art. This is ironic in the sense that everything that we create is in computer space, and it's not organic in any sense, it's extremely artificial. So as an artist, in some sense I operate like God, creating a virtual world, inventing the rules of life, death, artificial physics and things like that.
Latham and his team not only produce unconventional art, but art with a message.
The themes that we are dealing with in our work make people feel quite uncomfortable. In particular, parodies of genetic engineering, comments on man's relationship and manipulation of the natural world. And quite a lot of what we talk about is actually science, things that are happening on modern day farming, things like that. So the work does actually often make people feel quite uncomfortable, particularly some of the forms that look like embryos and eggs and things like that. But really, I feel that that's really what art should be talking about now, because this is really extremely important, what's happening in scientific laboratories. And art, in its best sense, mirrors what's happening in society.
Latham has published a CD-ROM that gives anyone with a PC the chance to make organic patterns on their own computer screen.
Organic art comes on a CD-ROM, and you stick this CD-ROM in your PC, and it comes up with a menu like this. And there are a number of options which you as the artist, the public as the artist, can select and control. What organic art does, it allows the layman to create computer art for themselves. Very quickly, they can be building very complex organic structures that in the past would have been purely created by software. I think in many ways, genetic art is a bit like when pop music first came into being. And people in the classical world feel very uncomfortable with pop music. And I think it's very similar. Computer art makes people in the traditional art world feel very uncomfortable because it is very new and it has its own rules. And I think really computer art in some ways could actually liberate modern art and actually take it and push it in a new direction. Maybe people in the art world are aware of this and are kind of nervous about this because computer art doesn't rely on the traditional dealer world. It doesn't rely on any conventional exhibiting spaces. It has its own hierarchy, its own way of doing business. And in some ways, it is like a kind of mini revolution, if you like, in cultural terms. I'm appealing to a different audience. And in some ways, there's something slightly revolutionary about this, that one is overthrowing this older establishment. What's more interesting and more to do with the 20th century is art that relates to software. Software is what controls the world that we live in.
As art meets software, it's become part of a brand new market. Museums like Britain's National Gallery are now selling digital rights to reproduce their works to people like Microsoft's Bill Gates. But will looking at art on a computer change the way we think about painting?
Painting is a medium which was highly influential at one time, but which you could say is now becoming more marginalized. Nevertheless, it still plays a significant aesthetic role. But I think that the animated image, and above all, the interactive image, will become increasingly important, and perhaps will become the major art form of the 21st century, which in turn will be determined by the creators of virtual worlds.
Paintings are changing, and traditional museums are changing with them. Here in the Berlin Gallery, they're experimenting with new forms of interactive art. This painting is actually a computer screen pretending to be a conventional painting. A hidden camera films the observer, scanning his eye movements, and the computer repaints the picture as the viewer's eye moves from one area to another. How will technology like this affect traditional art? Will the two coexist peacefully, or will the newcomer take the place of the old-timer? That question hovers over one of the cornerstones of civilization, words on paper. Some people worry that the spread of the new technology will make books an endangered species. Well, in fact, despite the boom in internet use, sales of books in the United States are at record levels.
I think you have to be very wary when you hear people claiming that the arrival of a particular new technology will transform everything. For example, when writing was invented, we didn't stop talking to each other. And when the telephone was invented, we didn't stop meeting each other in the flesh. So we're not necessarily saying that everything will change. That's the first thing I'd like to point out. I want to make it clear that there isn't going to be a simple substitution of the virtual for the real. I'm sure that books will always exist as something physical. They'll never disappear altogether, although their use will decline. But it's a very different story for writing. Writing and reading is growing enormously because of all the text on our computer screens, whether from CD-ROMs or through all the written information on the internet and the World Wide Web. So you could say that, far from being at the end of a civilization of reading and writing, we are perhaps at the beginning of an extraordinary rise in the culture of the word.
Cyberspace seems to be whetting our appetite for words. This CD-ROM holds the entire Encyclopedia Britannica, 32 volumes, 44 million words. Of course, having information at your fingertips and understanding it are two different things. Playing with paintings on a CD-ROM may make art less intimidating, but what insights does this electronic cut-and-paste culture provide? Online art galleries, interactive medieval manuscripts, old culture in new clothes. Now it may all be available on computer, but is that enough to keep it alive? As for the new electroculture, does its new form of art also come with new ideas?
Human thought reached a plateau with the Athenian Greeks, as far as I could see. In literature, art, every field of human effort. And since then, it's just been up and down, to such an extent that the humanists say there's nothing new under the sun and nothing ever changes. What they're really saying is, we haven't gotten any good ideas since the time of the Greeks. And I think that was true in almost all fields except mathematics and computer science. In physics, there were some new ideas, maybe hundreds of them. But when a friend of yours is doing something mysterious with a computer, he's probably using an idea no one's ever had before. And so to me, it's not just another gadget, but it's the richest thing that's happened to us in at least 2,000 years.
Coming up, cyber music for the masses. virtual instruments make their debut. Next on Cyberspace. You're watching Cyberspace on TLC. The computers played a bigger part in music making than perhaps any other art form of the past 30 years. At New York's Lincoln Center, a new work is about to be performed with the help of the audience and several computers.
This is where I went to school. And of course, when I was here 20 years ago, I was steeped in the middle of the classical music tradition and the idea of writing music on music paper and having music be a very internal activity and a very path. You know, the idea then was the great man theory, where I was trained as a composer and I would write this piece at home and give it to the orchestra, and the audience would sit there and passively listen and then say how great it was. One of the statements we're trying to make is that one way to revitalize music and make it as exciting and visceral as it should be is to say that you don't have to be trained at Juilliard, you don't have to be Beethoven to have an active relationship to music. You don't have to play piano for 20 years.
This isn't a video arcade, but the lobby of the concert hall. The public is playing what the composer calls hyper instruments. These digital instruments don't have keyboards or strings, but they let you produce music in some unusual ways. Hyper instruments are computer memories containing sampled sounds, fragments of sound, that are then made into melodies or rhythms by the players. For some instruments, you need to push buttons to make the sounds you want. Others are based on arcade racetrack games. It's all part of making music fun, even if the music that comes out may not be to everybody's taste. The work began months earlier at the Media Lab near Boston with the invention of the instruments themselves.
So this is called a sensor chair, and it's an instrument designed to give fun musical performance and expression that can be played basically by anybody who likes music. You don't have to be an expert performer, although it does take skill. The way it works is I'm sitting on a chair that has a piece of metal on the seat. When I sit on that, my body starts emitting electricity almost like an antenna. And each of these 4 canisters, 1, 2, 3, 4, plus these 2 things under my feet are actually sensors, and they're measuring how much electricity is coming out of my body. So when I move my hand here, for instance, you can see it light up. The computer then turns this all into a kind of active surface. So anywhere I move when I'm sitting in the chair is measured by the instrument. And since it's really a virtual instrument, not only is it easy to play, but I can change the music it makes. So by just pushing one of the pedals with my feet, I now have a completely different instrument. Now, if I lean back like this, it does nothing. I can make it louder. I can make it higher, lower. I can change the color of the sound, like that. And
the artists and scientists of cyberspace are like explorers of a new world, or maybe more like excited children in a toy shop. For many people, the medium is still louder than the artistic message it's producing, but then these pioneers and proponents of cyberspace are marching to their own beat. When it comes to talent, the internet is neutral. It lets any user broadcast their writing or music or art, and lets every cyber surfer judge its quality. The medium doesn't judge the message.
This will only work if all of us do all we can to push it as far forward as possible. Then the people who come after us will stand on our shoulders and they'll push it as far forward as possible. This sense of trying to create value and build the new structures together to create this new world, it seems to me is something that needs to be a very dominant theme, because it could go terribly wrong, and there will be areas where it will go terribly wrong, and it will be down to us to use these new tools in ways that create a wonderful new environment.
However we use cyberspace, and whatever we use it for, the technology can begin to release our own imagination. The best way to predict the future is to create it yourself.
Coming up, sure, it's annoying when you're trying to get to work in the morning, but fog serves a very useful purpose on our planet. See why on Wonders of Weather, next from TLC.